Okay, I think we are ready to start. Some more people will join then also in the next minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I hope you're all healthy and in good shape, and that you have a stable internet connection allowing to join the event. My name is Raimund Meyer. I'm Senior Water Resource Management Specialist at the World Bank, and I'm the task team leader of the Danube Water Program, which is jointly implemented by the World Bank together with the International Association of Water Service Companies in the Danube River Catchment Area, long name, abbreviation is IWD. One of the key objectives of the Danube Water Program is to support knowledge sharing in the Danube region for the creation of a community of knowledge of water sector professionals, allowing to learn from each other and to discuss new ideas and also to implement them then afterwards. In that tradition, the Danube Water Program launched this year a new so-called Know Now webinar series, focusing on up-to-date topics relevant for the water sector in the Danube region. Today we have the third event in the series with the title Green Deal for the Blue Danube, the European Green Deal and its implications for the water sector in the Danube region. The Green Deal, the European Green Deal, is an ambitious new growth strategy aiming to transform Europe into a climate neutral, resource efficient, fair, green and competitive economy. And these ambitions are also very much in line with the new World Bank approach to development, the so-called GRID approach, supporting green, resilient and inclusive development. There's hardly any high-level event where the Green Deal is not mentioned and addressed, and we recognize that quite often in the exchange with sector professionals, the question arose, what is in it for the water sector? What are the implications, challenges, and what are the opportunities for the water sector? And overall, how can this be financed also taking into account the overall development challenges many countries are facing in the Danube region? With today's webinar, we aim to shed some more light on these important questions with a distinguished group of speakers from the European Commission and from two international financing institutions, the World Bank and the European Investment Bank. We also hope that today's event brings along the opportunity to learn about some of the most recent up-to-date developments going on at EU level. And in that context, we also ask for your active participation during the webinar. I hope you will enjoy today's event and that you have the feeling your time is well spent participating in this event today. And without further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Philip Weller, who is the head of the Technical Secretariat of IWD and who kindly agreed to moderate today's session. Philip, handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Raimund, and welcome to everybody who is participating in this webinar. As Raimund has pointed out, this is part of a series, but I must say a topic that is extremely important in terms of the future of the Danube region. And we are very, very grateful for good representation of panelists, and we will introduce them in just a second. But before I do, just a few housekeeping issues. This session is being recorded and would be available on demand. A number of people have already asked me whether it would be available afterwards. Yes, it will be. And the summary of the session would be published on the Voice of the Danube site, the website, www.i8wd.at. You can find information about upcoming events as well on that site. For this session, extremely important is that the chat box we want to use for general requests and interactions with other participants, but for the question and answers, which we have allocated a certain amount of time for, and I think we hope to be an important part of this event, please use the question and answer box, which is the one that is the basis on which the panelists can see the questions and send the questions to the panelists. Your microphones are muted, and we will not be able to respond to raising hands, but you will be able to, in that question and answer box, communicate or through the chat box directly with somebody. So with that, then I would suggest we begin. As Raimund has outlined, we have a very good group of panelists for today's session. We're very fortunate to have Bettina Dozier from the European Commission, who will provide us with this overview of the Green Deal, but also then to have two people responding to that from financial institutions that are using the instruments that are available and working on projects in the region that are either benefiting from or utilizing the tools available. And that is Marco Veros from the European Investment Bank and Simon David Ellis from the World Bank. We will begin with the opening statement then from Bettina, and to thank you, Bettina, for joining us and providing the perspective of the Commission, in particular the unit of water, which you're responsible for. The implications of this for water are significant, and we're very, very grateful to have you here and to be able to have this presentation, which will give everybody a good background, I think, in terms of the Green Deal. So turn the floor over to you, and you can share your screen, I hope, effectively, and we've tried before to see that it does work. So, yep, coming. So there we go. Yep, you're all set.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much. And I think I'm now also unmuted. So again, warm welcome also from me to all the participants. As was already mentioned, I work in the European Commission in the so-called water unit in the Directorate General for Environment. And we are, of course, very actively following the Green Deal. It is extremely important. And what I would like to do today is to give you a kind of short guided tour through the Green Deal and its initiative to help you better understand which ones are particularly relevant for water and why. I thought I would not necessarily go into all the details, but rather show which ones are important and which ones fit together. So kindly, in the introduction, you already heard that the European Green Deal is a top priority of the current European Commission's political agenda. And it is indeed a rather complicated construct. So at the origin was a communication of December 2019, in which the Commission set out its strategic vision and what the Green Deal was going to mean. It was already mentioned, it's the new growth strategy for Europe. And it is then sent out or constructed in a number of initiatives, which have been coming since last March. And successively, the picture is becoming more complete. So you will see that there is a number of headlines in the Green Deal, and then the concrete initiatives come to support and to explain how these headline ambition targets or strategies will be put into motion actually at the European level, but also, of course, across Europe and in the different member states and locally. So we have put together for you, and understand you will receive this presentation also afterwards, so you don't have to take notes now or anything. We have put together for you a selection of those Green Deal initiatives that are particularly relevant for water. You can see that there's already a high number of them. The latest having come out actually this morning, the Zero Pollution Action Plan for Air, Water and Soil. I will get back to that in a second. So what I have done for the purposes of now is to select those where I think they're really the most important ones from the water perspective, and also the most important ones maybe from the Danube perspective, because we are trying to find out together today how all this is relevant for the Danube area, which, as we know, has some or many EU member states, but also some neighboring countries as partners. And of course, the European Green Deal is also for you. It has also an international dimension. So there's a number of further initiatives forthcoming. Those you will also find listed, and we won't go into those today. We will focus on the ones that are already there, because there is already a whole lot. I'll start with the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is a continuation of a policy that already existed in the previous Commission. The circular economy, of course, is about resource efficiency, about becoming more sustainable and really transiting to this new type of approach and economy. And water is a very integral part of this at all parts of the circle. So the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is of last March, set out a new push for water efficiency. We all know that in our water legislation, there is already a lot to be found on these issues, but with the Circular Economy Action Plan, we get this political momentum to really start working more on these. At the same time, our new water reuse regulation has come about. You know, there was political agreement last year, and it has actually entered into force and will start applying in 2023. Water reuse regulation is a very integral part of this new approach to water efficiency, and so will be the forthcoming revision of the Industrial Emissions Directive. I'll get back to that a little bit later as well. The next very important initiative for water, also of last spring, is the new biodiversity strategy. Again, there was already a biodiversity strategy in place at EU level, but this one is new. It is far more integrated. It takes into account really all the sectors and how they come together to protect biodiversity. As you may know, there's a big COP later this year who will discuss this also at international level. And this EU biodiversity strategy was also meant to be an input to that. Water is very prominent in the strategy, a big focus on restoration and on the links between our water bodies and nature. And of course, also the legislation and how it is linked. You may have heard of one of the targets that is in this biodiversity strategy, which has actually become quite famous. It's about ensuring river continuity and restoring floodplains. And we have a target number in there of restoring 25,000 kilometers by 2030. The Danube is a very big river, and there are, of course, like on all of Europe's rivers, obstacles on the Danube. In fact, we know that across Europe, we have about 1 obstacle per kilometer of river. And the idea is not to now go and remove all obstacles. No, the idea is to look at the obstacles that are still in our rivers and to see which ones are obsolete because they've been there for a long time and which ones are still there and still have a purpose. And there's then, of course, also other means to ensure river continuity if an obstacle has to stay there because it is still in use and has a very important purpose. Then there's other methods that can be used. And I think in the Danube, you know a lot about this because you are trying to ensure continuity, including for migrating fish. And as European Commission, I'm also happy to say that we support you very much on this. We just started a new project to help get to continuity at the Iron Gate dams. The next very important strategy is the so-called farm to fork. This strategy focuses on agricultural production and consumption, and it sets targets in the area of nutrients, pesticides reduction, nutrient losses to be reduced, and so on. For water, this is extremely important. We know from our water legislation already that diffuse pollution is a very big problem, and it is, of course, also in the Danube region. So again, by having this new strategy and call for action, we put a bit of a political chapeau on actions that we can then take forward under our water legislation and together with all concerned and all other policies. Another one that is, I think, important in the Danube context is the new strategy on energy system integration, which is from last summer. It sets out how Europe will have to work to make sure that its energy production and consumption becomes more sustainable in the context of the ambition of the European Green Deal and, of course, in the end, climate neutrality for all of Europe. So it's impossible not to mention it, but of course, from the perspective of water, there's the issue of hydropower, which fits into the bigger issue of renewable energies. And we've already talked about possibilities of helping that obstacles become less of obstacles. the energy systems integration strategy goes in the same direction. It is about how to ensure that we become more sustainable in our energy management. I'll also mention the next environmental action program, which brings together a little bit all the topics that we have had on the table for a long time, but now really catering to the Green Deal and its new ambition. There is 2 of the 6 priorities of the new action program that are specifically relevant for water. You will be able to look at this in more detail, but just to say again, this is a new integrated strategic context for all of us to work together. We've talked about water efficiency also on the big scale already in the Circular Economy Action Plan. Now we're coming into a bit more detail, and the initiative called Renovation Wave is relevant in this context from our water perspective. It is about generally how to make our buildings more sustainable, but this of course also includes water management in buildings. So not only do we want to become more efficient in water use across sectors and on the big scale, but also a bit on the smaller scale. And there is some actions in there that are particularly relevant, including the so-called levels framework, which is a way of measuring consumption and of making sure that the consumption is within limits and useful. I'll now come a bit more into the area of pollution. There is the chemical strategy for sustainability. It is a follow-up on previous plans for a toxic-free environment, and this is the articulation is of last autumn actually, and it sets out in a very comprehensive and integrative way how we should deal with all questions linked to chemicals. If you look at the document in more detail, you will find that there's a lot in there linked to our water legislation also, which of course also has lists of chemical substances and so on. You may be aware also that we are working at the moment on reviewing the lists of the so-called priority substances and groundwater pollutants. All this is already set out also in the chemical strategy at strategic level, and it is linked to other things that are going on in the chemicals area. Very important is that the chemical strategy is also trying to introduce some kind of rationalization and synergies. This is something that we've discussed with stakeholders a lot for a long time. So substances that are regulated under different pieces of chemicals legislation should of course be treated in the same way, share risk assessments and so on. For all this, the foundations are laid, and this will be followed up also at the legislative level at a later stage. More specifically, even there is the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which came also last November. This is not directly something announced in the Green Deal, but we like to put it into that context because of course it goes in the same direction, and it has also a dedicated chapter on more sustainability for chemicals. You may know that already previously from the Commission there had been the so-called strategic approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment, which is directly linked to our water legislation. And this has now been anchored in the new pharmaceutical strategy as well. We came forward with a progress report on how much has been achieved under our strategic approach on pharmaceuticals, and we published this together with the new pharmaceutical strategy. You will see that most of the actions from that a bit older strategy have by now been addressed. Some have even been completed, and a lot is still ongoing. This is particularly relevant also in the Danube area, and we were also happy from the Commission side that from the Danube side you participated in many of the activities that we were carrying out also in terms of concrete research in this area. Finally, navigation, of course, a very important topic also for the Danube. There's a new sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which is about all modes of transport. And this, of course, also includes navigation, very important, fully anchored in the Green Deal, and also, of course, our principles of the Water Framework Directive. So there is some more that will be forthcoming, including a communication on the so-called NAIADES program, which will set out also in more detail what exactly in the navigation area can be done to ensure that it contributes to the overall effort. Finally, the climate adaptation strategy, also new because there was one before, is extremely important. It complements what was already on water efficiency in the Circular Economy Action Plan. It's a very comprehensive strategy, and it really goes to the systemic level and suggests how in Europe we can become smarter about adaptation and all the sectors in which we have to apply new thinking and new methods to make sure that we prepare ourselves, because the climate projections tell us that across Europe, north and south, east and west, climate will have more and more impacts. We already feel them a lot in the water area, both in terms of too much water and too little water, whereas these are not segmented. So also in Northern Europe, we have droughts now regularly, and in Southern Europe, we have a lot of floods, and all this is increasing and requires really a new way of working together. You may be aware also that just about 2 weeks ago, the EU environment ministers met under the Portuguese presidency and dedicated their informal ministerial meeting precisely to the topic of water and adaptation. It was great discussions, the whole day dedicated to water and adaptation, and this will now be reflected also in Council conclusions that are being negotiated at the moment amongst the member states. So in terms of water, the new climate adaptation strategy has a whole section with actions. I will not get into the details, but this is really fully in line with what we're trying to achieve under our water legislation and its objectives. Finally, now, as of today, here is the Zero Pollution Action Plan. This was announced in the Green Deal as the so-called zero pollution ambition, and has now found its concrete declination in a set of targets, headline actions, and concrete actions. It's a very comprehensive document. I invite you to read it. It is online as of this lunchtime. And I've just collected for you a bit the overall ideas, which is a really integrated approach to pollution management, and to no longer look at water pollution separate from soil pollution, separate from air pollution, but also see the links and how we can address it in a comprehensive way to make sure that we don't lose any links. Of course, the sectors are very important, and the pressures that come from the sectors, but again, they work together. So we know, for example, that agriculture has a big impact on water, but also on air and soil, and it's the same for many others. And in this new action plan, you will see also, with the help of some charts, how we think that Europe could better address this, both on paper and in action, because it already sets out a lot of actions as well, including in the water area. There's so-called flagships, and I would say that all 9 of them have a water element to them. We will be working on those, and some of them are also participatory and invite for contributions. And so we will be meeting with you and working with you to make sure that we can move forward together towards the zero pollution ambition. I know that the colleagues after me will talk more about money, but I would be incomplete if I wouldn't mention that we are, of course, in the Commission very much aware that all of this is very expensive. On top of it, we are in COVID times, so the EU level is making available a very, very big pot of money, consisting on the one hand on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and on the other on the new multi-annual financial framework. All these are opportunities to invest in sustainable water projects, to invest in nature-based solutions, and to invest. Water investments also bring jobs. Invest really to make sure that our next generations have enough water and enough clean water for all the uses that we need it for. So we have a number of facilities. I already mentioned this, and we are really in a process, first of all, right now with the recovery and resilience plans, but also already thinking about the next multi-annual financial framework and the cohesion funds and the agriculture funds and so on, and how we can integrate water there. We've made available a number of documents already to help our member states and stakeholders to come together and to discuss and to form projects. This is, of course, a difficult process, but it's really worth it. The recovery and resilience plans were due last week, and many of them have reached the Commission. Others are still working a little bit on them, and the Commission is in contact. So from the water side, me and my colleagues, we've also been involved in helping our member states to make sure that the water projects are included and that they are really water projects that help and that do no significant harm, which is the so-called green oath of the Green Deal, and also set out in the new taxonomy regulation and its delegated act. This is a legislation that sets out what investments can be considered sustainable. And we have in there very detailed activities related to water also, and this process will continue. Similarly, we also set out in this legislation what projects cannot do so that they do not harm water. This is a very important point, and we're looking at these criteria in the context of the recovery and resilience plans, but of course also in the context of any of the new programming periods. We've also put together some possibilities of what types of projects would be sustainable for those who are looking for ideas, what to do with the funds that are available, and the funds, of course, not only from the European level, but also national, private, and all other kinds of funding, including from the international financial institutions. There's also a lot of possibilities for water research and water innovation enshrined in the next multi-annual financial framework in the so-called Horizon Europe program. And there's specific elements of this program dedicated to water also. So there's missions and partnerships. I wanted to mention also, because I talked about COVID and recovery a little bit, that we are proud to say that even for our water legislation, there is a big place to help in dealing with the crisis, because we are working with the member states on making sure that all opportunities are used to detect the virus in wastewater. So we are working there with the Joint Research Service and all the member states to help them use the methodology and to help manage by early detection of hotspots, for example. Our water legislation, just to recall, is in constant consolidation and renewal. We have finished, of course, the big fitness check of the Water Framework Directive and the Floods Directive and the associated legislation, but there's also other water directives currently being looked into. And one of them is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is very important also for the Danube, as we can imagine, because there is a big delta and there's the coastal areas, and all this comes together. So I wanted to encourage you to participate, but this you may already be doing in all the possibilities that we are offering. There's a dedicated website where you can reply to public consultations, and a number of them are ongoing at the moment on the review of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, for example, but also forthcoming there will be consultations on our review of the pollutants in groundwater and surface water, the Bathing Water Directive, and also not yet, but in the not too distant future, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Just to sum up one more time, the European Green Deal really provides us now with the political chapeau and the necessary momentum to move forward. There is a lot of opportunities in the Green Deal for water actions. They are intrinsically linked to our water legislation, and we really look forward to working with the water communities and all other stakeholders that are concerned to make sure that we reach the objectives of our water legislation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bettina. And you managed in a very short time and in a very concise way, I think, to provide exactly as you said, an overview and a clarity about the multitude of activities and the coherence of the strategy that exists at the European Union level. As you've indicated, it's really up to the individuals in the water sector themselves to try to respond to that, to utilize these tools, utilize these instruments, provide inputs on those kind of legislative initiatives or questions that are being raised. And thank you very, very much for this. As we indicated at the outset, the presentation is going to be available. So anybody who wants to follow up on some of these things, because it was clearly a very large amount of information there, the presentation is available to you. And as Bettina's pointed out, there are a number of opportunities for input. We're hoping now that the dialogue also helps shape some of our own considerations related to this. I see from the water utility sector some key issues like pharmaceuticals, like the monitoring of COVID, et cetera, that are under discussion. And I think now from our colleagues from the finance sector, how maybe some of these financial resources can be utilized for improving the water sector. So thank you very much for that. And I would encourage participants to put your questions into the question and answer folder, and then we will come to those in the discussion period later on. I would now like to turn the floor over to Marco Barros, and Marco is, as indicated at the outset, with the European Investment Bank, and an institution that is using these instruments that are available, particularly the financing instruments, to secure funding for water-related projects. And Marcos is from the Water Division and will provide some examples of the kind of things that have been done. Marco, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much also to Katharina and to Raimund for the organization of this webinar. Thanks to Bettina for setting the stage, the framework in which we are operating. The European Investment Bank, as the EU bank, is of course one of the key players to implement on the ground through concrete projects the EU Green Deal. And we are in a special situation because we work both inside the EU and in the neighborhood countries. So I will show you today 4 case studies from EU countries, which can also serve as an example to some extent for what can be done in the neighborhood and especially in the Danube region. The next slide, please. So my first case study comes from Germany. It's in the Ruhr area. It's a heavily industrialized area, very densely populated, and the thick blue thing there you see on the left is the River Rhine, and this is the project dealing with the restoration of Emscher River, which was converted into an open sewer more than 100 years ago with the industrialization and the very active mining in this area. And 30 years ago, when mining declined, coal mining declined, they decided that it was time to clean up this river. And basically for over 100 years, they could not build a piped sewer system because there were too many settlements up to 25, 26 meters. So all the sewerage was conveyed in open sewers. And 30 years ago, they thought that it was time to end this situation, and wanted to reestablish the river as it was, about 80 kilometers long, with about 250, 260 kilometers of tributaries, little creeks, and build wastewater treatment plants to clean up the wastewater of about 2 million inhabitants, and also the stormwater before discharging it to the Rhine River. The target was to ensure connectivity and also to provide flood protection. Because of the ground settlements, a third of this area, more than 300 square kilometers, are below the river level because of these coal mine settlements. So 800,000 people live there, and they need to be protected adequately against flooding. If you click on the QR code, as you will get the presentation later, you can see some videos, more details, and a nice presentation on the project. The next slide, please. So here's some examples of what was done. As I said, the connectivity with the Rhine River was very important. In the 1960s, they had built a concrete cascade, which you can see on the little picture on the left. And the Emscher Genossenschaft, our client, bought the land, which you can see between the old canal and the power plant, which you see in the back. And they will build a flood area, a flood plain with a sloped bottom to allow for the fish migration to and from the Rhine. On the right side, you also see an example of river restoration. You see on the right side, you see the Strait Canal built in the 20th century between the 1900 and 1950. And on the left side, you see still under construction the restored river. That was an example where they had enough space. In many places, it was basically done on site with the available riverbed. Altogether, EIB has been accompanying the Emscher project for 10 years. We have signed a total of 1.85 billion loans with a maturity of 45 years. The investment reached over 5 billion euros, so it's really a mega project, one of the largest infrastructure projects in Germany, of which 80% go to wastewater collection and treatment, 15% to river restoration, and 5% to flood protection. So we have, as I said, Europe's largest river restoration project. And among the technical highlights are the 70 kilometer of a tunnel collector, which is under the old riverbed, and 4 big wastewater treatment plants with a total capacity of close to 5 million population equivalent. The next slide, please. So after this multi-billion project, something much more smaller, it's a project in Belgium. Where we have been working with the Wallonian wastewater agency for many years, and they wanted to develop something to secure the habitat of the pearl mussel, which is the European freshwater pearl mussel, a species threatened by extinction, and actually wanted to go beyond the requirements of the EU directives, the Water Framework Directive and Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, to secure and, where possible, re-establish these habitats. So we have been dealing with the SPGE, the client, for many years, and so actually it was in the framework of preparing the investment program that they said, well, we could actually carve out a small portion and make it eligible under the Natural Capital Financing Facility, the NCFF. And that's what we did. So it was a very small loan of 4.5 million for the 6 million investments targeting nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, such as the planted reed bed wastewater treatment plants shown here on this picture, to help securing the water quality in these little creeks. So you see here the project consisted of 3 very small wastewater treatment plants with a capacity of around 250 to 760 population equivalent. So really very, very small scale. And the loan was signed last year, and this year we will mobilize the technical assistance for the implementation of this operation. The next slide, please. So that is a project from Luxembourg. It's here in the capital city, where we have a very nice park, which was basically a natural floodplain, as you can see on the on the left picture, which is from more than 100 years ago. And then in the 1930s, they put all this in a very ugly concrete channel, which doesn't look very nice. So the city of Luxembourg wanted to restore this and also improve flood protection and also ensure connectivity. So we also, can we put the next slide, please? yeah, that was the first location. And we also have in this project a second location, which is north of the city of Luxembourg. That is the main river, the Alzette, which is prone to flooding. You see here a picture of a flood in 1993. And they did already some restoration works there. And we should continue this project with a restoration of about 1.4 kilometer length in a relatively highly urbanized area. And in this area as well, it was for the improvement of the visual impact and also for the flood protection. In total, it's about 35,000 people who will benefit from better flood protection. The next slide, please. So that's what they did in the, what is planned to be done in the area north of the city. You see on the on both sides, you see the current situation. So the riverbed was deepened quite considerably in the 20th century and disturbed the whole erosion level, sedimentation level. So the idea is to lift the riverbed up to the natural groundwater level, move it to the Talweg where it's possible. Of course, it's not possible everywhere. Enlarge the riverbed so that we create natural floodplains. And this loan is also relatively small. It's 9 million for an investment cost of about 12 million. And it's also under the Natural Capital Financing Facility, the NCFF. It's not yet signed. We target the signature this summer. The next slide, please. Yeah, we come to the fourth and last case study. That is a project in Croatia. We signed this loan in 2019 with the Croatian National Development, Croatian Bank for Development and Reconstruction. It's an intermediated loan. That means the HBOR will on-lend the money from EIB to smaller operations to support conservation, restoration, nature-based projects in different fields. Can be agriculture, can be ecotourism, forestry, green infrastructure for cities. And it's also under the NCFF. The EIB loan was signed 2 years ago for an amount of 15 million euro to support investments of up to 20 million. The technical assistance was already mobilized with a grant of 900,000 euro under the NCFF with funds from EU Life. Unfortunately, the start was delayed last year because of the COVID crisis and the priority given to recovery works from the 2 recent earthquakes Croatia has suffered from. And there's also a difficulty to find suitable projects because the NCFF rules are quite strict. The eligibility criteria are quite strict, and there are competing programs, and so it's not easy to find suitable project. But we are optimistic that with the end of the pandemic, the TA consultant can really start working and preparing the suitable project. Good, that was all from my side. And yeah, in the annex to this presentation, there's a general overview of what EIB does in the water sector. And anyway, I'm available for any questions you might have. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Marco. And I think you've demonstrated the magnitude of the types of projects that are possible and the possibilities that under the Green Deal and the financing instruments that are available, how they can potentially be used for activities in the interests of the overall strategy that has been talked about, and how that has been done in the past and perhaps now can be accelerated related to the additional funding mechanisms that are there. Thank you for that. And we'll now turn to Simon David Ellis from the World Bank. The World Bank, as you know, is a cooperating partner together with IIWD on the Danube Water Program. And Simon is one of the bank staff responsible for projects in the region. And Simon, I would turn the floor over to you for your response and comments on the utilization of the legislative framework and the Green Deal instruments that are available. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thanks to the team at the Danube Water Programme for putting this together. And Bettina and Marcus, I'm not going to be able to follow with quite so much water-specific detail, not being a specialist in this area, but hopefully I can give you a bit of a broader view of how we see, the Green Deal. And I work in the Western Balkans region. So one of the key issues for us is, what does the Green Deal mean for the Western Balkans? How do we think about going about implementing the key features of this in the Western Balkans? And what does it mean for the policy and investment framework around that? We're actually at the moment undertaking some analytical work in the region, which is really looking at some of these questions. And one of the key things, Bettina, you raised at the beginning of your presentation, that this is the new growth strategy for the EU. And similarly, for us in the Western Balkans, we have to be able to demonstrate that this green agenda is going to be good for growth, and that it is going to deliver jobs in the region. Because unless we can do that, I don't think that we're going to be able to convince the policymakers to make the necessary investments and policy changes. So trying to create a narrative is going to be important in this regard. Reaching out to civil society, private sector, state-owned enterprises, the government is also key, so that this isn't just a narrative between the key practitioners and the government. It also goes broader than that to society. And we also need to look at, what are the key policy drivers in the region, particularly post-COVID. What does it mean for, the ability for governments to actually finance some of the things that are going to need to be financed? How open are they to, the sort of reform agenda that is going to make their economies more resilient, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, being a bank, a development bank, we're also interested in what this actually means for us in terms of the lending program, and how we need to reorientate our lending program to meet the needs of the Green Deal and what it means for the Western Balkans region. Just at the very high level, some of the areas that we think we're going to really focus on going forward is the energy transition. The Balkans has something like 3 times more energy intensity than the EU. So this means transition from coal. Bettina raised the whole series of issues around energy efficiency and buildings, and so that sort of thing. We have the green motorization agenda. The region has moved from rail to road, and we need to move them back to road again, and ideally to inland waterway transport as well, if we can possibly do that. The cities of the region need to be the drivers of growth, and at the moment they're not. They're not delivering what they should be, and partly that's because of the services that are being provided, whether it be water supply and sanitation, solid waste, etc., are not up to scratch. Air quality is very often in the winter months we see the air quality in some of the Western Balkan cities matching that of Beijing and Delhi and cities like that. So that's also a big agenda. More specifically related to water, we have the EU accession agenda, and particularly Chapter 27 negotiations. And I think this is going to be extremely demanding for a lot of the countries in the Western Balkans. There's going to be big investment requirements, and there's also going to be a need for a large policy change in a lot of countries. We know just in Montenegro, for example, which seems to be most advanced in these areas, that the likely cost is going to be 1.4 billion, which is, it's a significant amount of money for a small economy. Now, I'd like to move more specifically to our thinking in terms of water and the issues for the water sector in the Western Balkans. Bettina, again, you raised the whole issue of adaptation, and really this is such a key issue for the Balkans region. We see year after year flooding costing you know, significant percentage points of GDP. It happens every year. It's not just every few years we get the big one, but every year there is some cost associated with flooding. Similarly with droughts, the region is heavily dependent on agriculture, and there's a need to really manage, you know, this too much water sometimes, not enough water at other times. And it's also, this whole resilience agenda is, as I was saying, post-COVID, we really need to think about how we can make economies more resilient. And I think this is important for the water utilities, for example, in the area that, you know, at the moment, you could argue they're a bit of a drain on resources. There's issues over financial sustainability, both in the water utilities and the irrigation companies. And going forward, we really need to think about, you know, how can we improve the sustainability of these institutions, and think about, you know, asset management going forward. I talked about the growth agenda. Again, water is a key part. We have an initiative called the Blue Economy, which particularly in the Balkans region is important because we have countries like Montenegro and Albania, which derive much of their revenues from water, you know, whether it be coastal or the river system, from tourism, that sort of thing. So really need to think about optimizing the revenue from this. And of course, on irrigation, agriculture is still one of the key contributors to GDP in the region. So thinking about that sort of thing as well. And just my final point, I would like to give a bit of a plug to one of the projects that we have ongoing in the region on the Savran-Drina corridor project. And I think this also goes a little bit to Bettina's presentation, the fact that, you know, this is such an integrated issue, you know, so this project is really trying to think about flood protection, about navigation, and the importance of the Danube for, and the Sava in this case, for navigation. Tourism is a big area, hydropower. And I think that the last thing I would like to say before I finish is the importance in water of regional cooperation. And the fact that many of these water courses go across borders, and it's really key that we have good cooperation between countries to manage these facilities to the best use of everyone. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. And this, I think, very specifically, the focus on the Western Balkans is extremely important. And one where, as you've indicated, there's quite a bit of potential, I think, for reform in the water sector, and these instruments potentially being ones that can be utilized quite effectively. I would encourage people to put comments in the question and answer session if you can. I would like just maybe to kick it off, and Bettina, perhaps just turn to you on exactly the comment that Simon just raised now, if I could, on the relationship between what is, I mean, it's extremely comprehensive what has now come forward. How is that different than what was before? And in particular, the point that Simon just raised about the need for this inter-country cooperation, the role of the river basin management plans or these cooperation mechanisms like that in addressing some of these questions. If you could just quickly address that in the sense of how can the Green Deal be, or how is it so different? And I think some mechanisms have been pointed out, but also what does that mean in terms of the cooperation perhaps between countries?
Thank you very much. Yes, you give me the opportunity to be a bit more enthusiastic even. So what is new in the Green Deal is really this cross-sectoral approach that we look at problems and we look at how they come together. I tried to explain this a little bit in the context of the now zero pollution action plan. So in the past, we have had very concretely in our water community a lot of cooperation already with other sectors, but it was most of all the water community inviting the others to come and join us and discuss with us. overall, this worked very well, so no criticism there. But the problems that we have today are different. And what is really important is that we now have a joint cause that is shared by all. Before, we wanted the clean water and enough water, but the others maybe wanted something else and tolerated the clean water. Now, no, now we all want the same thing. We all want zero pollution, and above that, we want climate neutrality. So new is now that we need to come together. And what is really glorious is that our water legislation allows us to do that, because the Water Framework Directive has from the beginning taken this approach, but maybe it was not so much encouraged, but by what was around the Water Framework Directive. So now we don't have to invent anything new. We can use the mechanisms. We have already this river basin organization and planning. And this also includes the cross-border element that you have mentioned. The Danube cooperation is, of course, the biggest case in point, and one of our best examples of how this can work in practice. But what we really would like now to encourage is this opportunity, the moment that is now there with this new push, to make the best possible use of it in the next planning cycle for the river basin management and flood risk management plans, which are due to be finalized by the end of this year. And in these plans, our river basins have to set out how they will manage the problems, how they will make sure that there's enough water for everybody, how they will make sure that this water is clean enough. And here, cross-border cooperation, regional cooperation comes in, is very, very important. We all know that what happens at one end of the river has implications on the other end, and nobody really questions that. This is not the case in all other policy areas. So there, I think we're a bit lucky in the water area in that it is so evident that we have to work together. And maybe this also gives me the occasion for all the participants in this webinar to encourage you to participate in the public consultations that are going on, not the ones that I mentioned now for the European Green Deal initiatives and the water legislation itself, but the ones on the concrete plans for your river basins, because these are in public consultation at the moment. The Water Framework Directive foresees this. And almost everywhere, if not everywhere, there's also not only online consultations, but also workshops, probably online as well, but opportunities for the different sectors to come together, and also the neighbors to join in. And by the way, our neighbors also prepare river basin management plans, so they have a bit of the same process.
Now, thank you very much. And I think, again, I think the response, the ideas of using these opportunities and the encouragement for people to tap into these processes is extremely important. I would like to, there is a comment or question, sorry, in the chat related to this idea of zero pollution and how to achieve that. And I wonder, Marco, if you could perhaps address this question of whether at the water utility or the local level, this kind of cooperative activities related to municipal planning and water service improvement, I would say, is actually in the kind of projects that you identified. It looked like those kind of relationships were being built at a very local level. And similarly for Simon, I wanted to check on issues related to energy and water, because I think those are two big areas where there clearly needs to be, as Bettina's just pointed out, this multi-sectoral approach, and whether there are some mechanisms to do that. Yeah. Bettina, if you want me to think about the response in the question related to the zero pollution part, but if I could give the floor to Marco for a second now on how at a local level the sort of intersectoral cooperation is happening, or if it's not happening, to identify that.
Well, if it's happening or not, that depends very much on the local situation, of course. Yeah. So we see in Europe very big differences how the water sector is organized. We have countries where it's very highly fragmented. France, for example, has basically half the number of all water utilities in Europe, about 68,000, of which 33,000 are in France alone. In other countries, it's very centralized, like in the Netherlands or in UK or in Belgium, we have a few dozen water utilities. So the level of cooperation depends very much on the scope of the utilities. Yeah, if you look into drinking water only, It's a different thing than if you look into drinking water, wastewater, and also stormwater. In many countries, especially in the Western Balkans, we have separations for this. Stormwater is handled by the municipality, while as the drinking water and wastewater is handled by utilities. But all this has to be seen in a context, and especially when we want to tackle adaptation. We need to look at in the broader context on a city level or region level, and put all these things together and cooperate. That is what we see luckily in several member states, where there are these adaptation strategies which exist on urban level or on regional level. So they look into all these interactions, and that's really important. And when this will be done, it will also reduce the damages coming from flooding or the interruptions to service coming from drought periods. That's why we encourage all our projects to undergo this climate risk and vulnerability analysis, the CRVA, and we have developed standard terms of reference to do so. And we have recently used this in Belgium and in Ukraine and elsewhere. So this is going forward, luckily. But there still remains a lot of things to do, not only in the Western Balkans, but also in the member states. I can also take the opportunity to reply to the question about the zero pollution, because we had a very nice project last year in Hamburg, which will be implemented in Germany's largest public wastewater treatment plant with a capacity of over 2 million. It will be the 4th treatment stage, that is to remove the micropollutants, that means pharmaceutical residues and other pollutants. And the second component was the world's first large-scale, industrial scale, phosphorus recovery from wastewater sludge. So that is what I know, the best available technology to remove pollutants through incineration, controlled incineration, and through recovery from the wastewater ash, so that the pollutants from the wastewater and from the sludge don't go into the environment anymore. But this is a very costly technology, which only makes sense in very large wastewater treatment plants, of course. Yeah. So on the small local level, it's not necessarily implementable today, yeah, because it's simply too expensive.
No, thank you very much, and it's important, I think, to have examples like that, and to highlight them and to show that such activities can happen in that regard. So thank you for responding. Simon, I would then turn it to you on this question of energy. And I think, if I understood from what Marco had said, is within the EIB, there's an evaluation criteria on projects that are happening, whether they are climate applicable, or at least their implications climate wise. And I assume for the World Bank as well, and what you've indicated is trying to marry the two in certain projects. If you could respond to that.
Yeah, certainly, in the World Bank, we have to measure, as in EIB and all the other IFIs, climate co-benefits, and those climate co-benefits can either be in terms of mitigation or adaptation. So, when it comes to energy projects, particularly, for example, if we're talking about hydro, then you would expect that they would be very high in climate co-benefits in terms of mitigation. But there are also substantial adaptation benefits there, because it can also support managing flood risk. For example, a lot of the dams can be used for both power and for managing flood risks. But the broader question about water and energy, I think, is one of the complicated one, and I'm probably not the best person to talk about it. But what's clear is there really needs to be a comprehensive approach to really think about how these rivers are going to respond to energy production, to tourism, to flood protection, etc. and this is what we're actually trying to do with the Savary Drina project, is to really look at the whole thing in totality. That, you know, it's not just the water needed for hydro production, it's also you know, how it can support with flood protection and that sort of thing. And a lot of work on this as well, looking at the problems of the proliferation, particularly in the Western Balkans, of these small hydro facilities. Much for energy production, and they're certainly doing harm in terms of, you know, the environment and the management of this. So those are the sort of things. Also on energy, we also need to think about cooling, thermal power plants, and also the pollution effects from some of the mining and the tailings that happen from these sources.
Thank you. Raymond, I'm having some connection difficulties. I think I did not hear everything, to be honest, but I may need your help then to close up if it continues. But in any case, I think I understood, I think, most of what Simon had just responded to. Bettina, I wanted to see if you wanted to respond to this question of the zero pollution. There's also a couple of other questions that are directed at you as well, and if you have had a chance to look in the chat, if you want to quickly respond to those issues. In particular, there's the question related to nature-based solutions and the Sustainable Development Goal 6 and how that relates to all of these activities, and a question about whether there's a sort of more, I would say, broad approach that is possible to the biodiversity questions. You'll see those questions in the chat. I'll let you see if you can package a response to those.
Thank you very much. I actually tried to answer two questions in the chat, but I have to, in the question and answer, but I have to admit that this is the first time I use the question and answer function in this application. So I don't know, did the answers arrive? Are they visible or not? If not, so on the zero pollution ambition, yes, I fully agree, this is very ambitious. And so what this strategy sets out in the beginning is that, of course, we are not trying to get to zero pollution overnight. This is not possible. But what we're trying to achieve is a pathway where we get to a stage where the levels of resistant pollution that we still have are no longer harmful for us, our human health, and the environment. This is what we're trying to get to, and what the strategy sets out is how we think we can get there, by bringing together everything we have already in terms of legislation, and by finding new ways and approaches and innovative ways to tackle the problem of pollution, also in a kind of circular way. So start with prevention and move through reduction and so on. On the nature-based solution, yes, this is a very integral and important part of the Green Deal thinking. So concretely, you will find in the new adaptation strategy a very, very big focus on nature-based solutions. It's also in the biodiversity strategy. And it's also everywhere when you listen to us from the water people in the European Commission or elsewhere. This is really something that we think is a win-win situation. And constructing these nature-based solutions can, of course, also create jobs. So we see really very big potential, and we've said this to anybody who wanted to listen when they asked what they could do in their recovery and resilience plans. And we will say it again when we get to the new programming period. This is also why in these colorful examples that I put in our presentation, you will find many ideas for nature-based solutions. Now on SDG 6, of course, the SDGs are channeled into the Green Deal. So if you will, the Green Deal is also our answer to how we want to address the SDGs and continue to address the SDGs. SDG 6 is the one on water, and in particular also water sanitation and infrastructure. And there we think we can achieve a lot also with our new setup where we have the ambition and the action, but we also have from the EU level a vast amount of funds that can be used to finance all this, and to hopefully inspire then also more funding at national, local level and in the private sector.
No, thank
Perhaps
you very
I
much.
can
And your
contribute.
responses did come through in the chats as well. I can see. So, and that somebody, Anna Pomosel, I think, has responded as well to indicate that they are there. So thank you for that. And yeah, then we are coming to a point where we need to slowly wind down. We want to ensure that these sessions are extremely informative, but also yeah, get dialogues. If there are any final questions that anybody wants to ask, what I would do in any case, though, is if I could turn to each of the presenters to, and I'll go in the reverse order now, perhaps Simon, if there's any final words that you want to say in response to this, then Marco, and then to Bettina, then to wrap it up then.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, yeah, actually, I've been informed that it was not me who was the problem, it was on your side. Yeah, it's yeah, but in any case, yeah, I think most of what you said was clear, so, but it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I don't have much to say. The only one thing I would say is that very often the dialogue around Green Deal focuses a lot on the decarbonisation agenda. And I think particularly for the water sector, adaptation is something that we really have to keep an eye on, particularly in the countries I work on in Western Balkans. But thank you for inviting me, and it's been a very informative session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your contributions. And we look forward to continue working with the World Bank on projects in our region that I think do benefit from these initiatives and perhaps incorporate some of the cooperation that is required. Marco, if I could turn the floor to you, any sort of final words that you would like to say, and thank you for providing some good examples of the kinds of things that are happening or have been happening, maybe can be followed up on.
Indeed, thanks, Philip. What I would like to mention is that the biggest obstacle, or one of the biggest obstacles for implementing green solution, nature-based solutions in our sector is the lack of awareness on the side of the utilities, on the side of the cities. These measures are still relatively new. They're not usable everywhere. Quite often they use more space, which is sometimes scarce in city areas. Quite often they don't offer all the functionalities classical concrete structure offers, be it for rainwater or flood protection, but it's usable in many places. And I think that events like this one you kindly organized today help create this awareness, help show utilities and city managers, municipalities alike, what is technically possible, that it can be done, and that it functions. That's the most important, that it functions for a better environment and better climate adaptation. Thanks again for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you. And yeah, as I say, I think particularly to providing some good examples and your comments now, I think have been extremely helpful. And this is a process. Bettina, I would give you the last word here before I turn it back to Raymond Meyer. And it's a short announcement just to the end to some follow-up events. But anything you have not said that you wanted to say, and now's your chance.
Wonderful. I will say it. Thank you very much for letting me participate and meeting a new audience, maybe if only digitally at least. I know that there is a big interest out there for our water activities and the European Green Deal. And Marco, you just mentioned awareness raising and how important this is for nature-based solution. Well, it's important for everything water. So could I maybe use the occasion to invite you all to stay in contact? Green Week, a very big event that we're organizing every year, is dedicated to zero pollution this year, and there will be a lot of water in there. There's dedicated sessions on water. One is actually about investments in water, and it will showcase some nature-based solutions also. And the other session is about the young generation's views on water pollution and what can be done about it. This is a very interactive one. for which we are also seeking contributions via the social media at the moment. So if you want to stay in touch, there's plenty of opportunity, and please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Bettina. And I would certainly encourage, having participated in Green Weeks in the past, they're extremely worthwhile events. And I know the Commission, it's a very good opportunity for people to have influence on the sort of thinking that goes on and to understand what's happening as well, and would encourage, as you've just done, that people try to connect up with that. Kathy, if I could just get the slide, there is another event which I would like to draw your attention to, and that is the European River Symposium, which is just coming up in a couple of weeks now, where the Commissioner himself actually will be the sort of the kickoff to this. Bettina herself will be in that event as well as Ms. Manfredi, also from the European Commission, but also a number of practitioners related to trying to apply these issues at a local level, including our own organization, or my own organization, IAWD, which will participate as one of the partners. You see underneath the picture of the Commissioner, the list of partner organizations that have helped organize this event, which again is to strengthen the dialogue and the momentum to ensure that these activities are being incorporated into actions that are taking place around Europe. And we certainly would encourage you to register and participate in that event if you want to follow up on some of the elements of the discussion that have happened here. And to have a chance to dialogue or interact with people who are engaged in these issues. That event actually will be done as a meeting, so there will be more potential for direct dialogue between participants. With that, then I would turn the floor back to Ryman just for the last closing words, and from my side to thank Bettina, Marco, and Simon for your presentations and contributions. For all the participants, participation in this event, thank you for joining with us. And I think, as we pointed out, this is a bit of a journey that we're going to be on for a while now, and that we all have the need for dialogue with one another, but yeah, for experimenting and seeing what things work and trying to sort of build on those initiatives that are taken. So thank you all for being a part of today, and I'll turn it back to Ryman for the final words.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thanks a lot really to all panelists and also participants for posting questions. The purpose for this event was to get a little bit more insights into the topic, into the Green Deal and the related implications. And I personally have to say I learned a lot today. And I will certainly also follow up when the presentations will also be made available, because I think there was much more information provided than it was in this short time frame possible to actually discuss in detail. So everybody, all the participants kindly invited to really look out. You will get an email also afterwards with the presentations, and which will allow you also to dive deeper into the overall topic. The Green Deal is certainly a topic which we will have to follow for a longer time, because I think it's very obvious, looking also at the input and the presentation which was provided, that it's an extremely ambitious approach, an extremely ambitious agenda. But on the other hand, I think for the water community, it also provides a lot of opportunities. As Bettina also said, we have a very comprehensive set of water legislation in the basin, and now around our water legislation, like, we have more support also towards integration of our water agenda also with other sectors. I think this is certainly, for me, one of the main takeaway questions. Also, lack of awareness, which is still in place, as Marco said, and we hope that this event contributed to further increase awareness about the Green Deal and the importance also for the water agenda. And also the overall topic of specifically for the water sector of adaptation, integration also with energy policies, as Simon pointed out, certainly a very important topic to be followed up. Overall extremely ambitious, but I think there's a specific reason why Ursula von der Leyen called the European Green Deal the European Man on the Moon moment. So I think this really tells a story how ambitious the approach is, and we certainly will follow up on this specific topic and also try to integrate all these approaches in the practical work we are doing from the World Bank side, but also in cooperation with other partners in the Danube region. And we look forward to being in touch with all the participants in order to jointly work on this ambitious agenda also in the future. So thanks a lot to everyone again, and we look forward to be in touch also in the future with everyone on further activities, in particular working together with you in the future also towards a more sustainable Danube region and the greener Danube region also. Thank you very much, and wishing you a good rest of the day.